So here's the story without further ado. Page 165, the Ark file. Then the wolves would come and the bear, we'd burn the campfires higher to keep our sheep safe. The dogs would run and bark all night, checking the flocks, scaring the wolves that would come down the mountain to catch just one little lamb. George paused and I quickly threw in a question, hoping he'd now talk about the artifact. Were you with your uncle when you first saw the Ark? I asked. Yes, I first went there when I was about 10 years old. It must have been about 1902. My grandfather was the minister of the big Armenian Orthodox Church in Van, and he always told me stories about the holy ship on the holy mountain. Then one day my uncle said, Georgie, I'm going to take you to the holy mountain. And he took me with him, packed his supplies on his donkey, and together we started our trek towards Mount Ararat. Uncle, that's the holy mountain, I said, pointing to what seemed to be our destination up ahead of us. That's right, Georgie, he said. Maasis is the holy mountain. That's what they called Ararat, was Maasis. My feet were getting sore, and the donkey kept wanting to go in the wrong direction, but we continued climbing until we got about halfway. Then Uncle took both supplies and me on his back, and we climbed and climbed. It took us almost 8 days from the time we left Van to the moment we got to the place on the holy mountain where both my grandfather and my uncle had said the holy ship had come to rest. I guess my uncle took me there that year because it was a year without much snow, Hagopian said. A smooth year, we called it. There's one of those about every 20 years. And then we got to the Ark. George stopped, groping for the exact words to describe his recollections as clearly as he could. I said, Uncle, it's so dark around here, nothing but mist. Is this the top of the world? Did the Ark rest all the way up here? Yes, he said, this is the holy Ark, this big ship right in front of you. Let me help you get on it. An immense stone mass loomed threateningly ahead of me. It was like a wall, like a building. It couldn't be. It didn't look like a ship. Is this really the ship, Uncle? I asked, touching the towering object. This is stone, not wood. It's the ship, all right, Georgie, he answered. Come help me. I'll prove it to you. He dropped his pack to the ground, and together he and I began to haul stones and huge boulders to the side of the ship. Uncle was a big man, well over 6 feet tall and very powerful, and within a short time he had stacked a pile of rocks against the side of the ship. Higher and higher we plowed them until at last he told me to stop. Georgie, come here, he said, grabbing me playfully by the arm. You are going on top of the holy Ark. He lifted me up and put me on his shoulders, and together we climbed the pile of rocks. When he had reached the top, his hands grabbed my ankles and he began to push me up. Reach for the top, Georgie, he yelled. Grab the edge and pull yourself up. A tear welled up in the old Armenian's eyes. He was reliving those nostalgic moments all over again and didn't care whether his emotions were showing. It was his youth he was recalling, and without us as a sounding board, it would have only been a voiceless memory. But now it had life, and he continued. I stood up straight and looked all over the ship. It was long, all right. I realized that things always seem larger to a child, but looking back now, I am sure it must have been at least 1,000 feet long and more than 600 feet wide. The height was about 40 feet or more. Look inside the Ark, my uncle called up to me. Look for the holes. Look for the big one. Look inside and tell me what you see. I shivered from the cold and from fear and glanced around me. Yes, there was the hole, big and gaping. Was that the one he meant? It looked so mysterious. Uncle, I'm scared, I yelled down to him. I see a large black hole in the top. Don't make me go in there, please. Don't be scared, Georgie, he said. There's no one in the Ark. It's been empty for a long time. Don't worry about it. I peeked into the blackness of the hole but saw nothing. Then I knelt down and kissed the holy Ark. Did you see anything else while you were up there? I interrupted him. Any other distinguishing marks that we might use for identification if and when we locate the object? George Hagopian nodded his head affirmatively. His eyes glistened with excitement. Oh, yes, many things. There's the moss, that green growth that covers the entire Ark. Also, when we were there, the top of the Ark was covered with a very thin coat of fresh fallen snow. But when I brushed some of it away, I could see the green moss growing right on top. When I pulled a piece off, it looked as if the rock was made of wood. The grain was right there, this green moss. It made the Ark feel soft and moldy. My uncle took his gun and shot into the side of the Ark, but the bullet wouldn't penetrate. It just dropped when it hit the side. The whole Ark was petrified, turned to rock. Did you see anything on the roof besides one large hole? Yes, I remember small holes running all the way from the front to the back. I don't know exactly how many, but there must have been at least 50 of them running down the middle with small intervals in between. After describing the holes to my uncle, I said, "What are these for, uncle?" "They're holes for air," Georgie said. "A long time ago, there used to be animals and people in the ark, and that's why they had those holes in there. There's one special hole, too, where Noah let the dove fly out." "Where did they all go, uncle?" I asked. "They just left, Georgie," he said. "They're gone. The holy ship is completely empty now." Uncle pulled his long hunting knife from his belt, and with the heavy handle, he chipped a piece from the side of the ark. "Uncle, I want to get off," I yelled down to him. "I'm scared. Will you catch me?" "Sure, but don't jump too wildly." So I let myself down the side of the ship until I felt his hands take my ankles in a firm grip. Gently, he let me down, and together we went back down the mountainside. The first thing I did when I arrived in Van was to see my grandfather. "Grandfather, I've been to the Holy Ark," I said proudly, filled with enthusiasm. "Uncle took me up there. I've been on it. I've looked into the hole." Overcome by the news, Grandfather hugged me, misty eyed. "Georgie, someday you will become a holy man," he whispered, trying to keep his voice from breaking. "You will be a holy man because you've been on God's holy ark." He never found out whether his dream for me ever came true, for a few years later, he died at Van. Intriguing as the story was, the details of the sighting were a bit too hazy, and for another 3 hours, Errol Cummings and I grilled Hagopian in a friendly way, extracting more facts, especially those that could be useful in our search for the ship's exact location. By sifting and comparing his various statements, we were able to zero in on precise questions, and George was more than willing to supply the answers from his slowly fading memory. "I saw the Ark a second time," he recalled. "I think it was in 1904. We were on the mountain looking for holy flowers, and I went back to the Ark and looked, and it looked still the same. Nothing had changed. I didn't get to the top that time, but stayed at the side and really got a good look at it. It was resting on a steep ledge of bluish green rock about 3,000 feet wide. Another thing I noticed was that I didn't see any nails at all. It seemed that the whole ship was made of one piece of petrified wood. I could even see the grain of the wood, even though the ship had already turned to stone." "How about windows and doors?" I asked. "Oh, no, there was no windows in the ship. Of that I am certain," he answered emphatically, his mind's eye roaming the sides of the ship. "And there was definitely no door in the side of the ship that I could see. No opening of any kind. There may have been one in the part I couldn't see, but that I don't know. That side was practically inaccessible. I could only see my side and part of the bow." "What was the shape of the ship? Was it perfectly straight? Was it rectangular, or what?" Hagopian paused for a moment before answering, for the waitress had come by to pick up our soup bowls. George waited until she was gone. "That roof was flat with the exception of that narrow raised section running all the way from the bow to the stern with all those holes in it. The sides were slanting outward to the top, and the front was flat. You know, I didn't see any real curves. It was unlike any other boat I had ever seen. It looked more like a flat-bottom barge. But the location, George, can you describe the location of the ship on the mountain? Are there any specific landmarks?" The answer came slowly but unhesitatingly. "I do remember that one of the sides of the mountain is impossible to climb. My uncle and I went through Bayazit, close to the border, and climbed the mountain from the direct shore of Azerbaijan. I recall trees and orchards somewhere between 10 and 15,000 feet on the mountain. We used to eat the fruit whenever we could. I'm sure that if the scenery hasn't changed too much, I could take you right to the spot. But at my age, climbing Maasis may not be that easy." And then they asked him, "What about wood?" And he says, "Any wood that's found is not real. That's not from the ark because the ark is petrified. Also, that site at 14,000 feet is too low. The place that I was much higher. The real ark is petrified. I do know it's on the mountain." And so they talked to him a little bit more about whether it's here or whether it's there. He was a child. He couldn't remember. The maps were different back then. And he basically says, "Come back and talk to me again." He had a strong handshake, a too strong handshake for a man his age. He says, "Perhaps I'll go back one day." But he died the following year.